시작합니다.
Title: Mary's Memories of Wugong School. Chapter 1: New Beginnings. Mary was excited but also a little nervous. She was moving to Wugong, a small village in the countryside. Mary loved her home in Seoul, but her parents said the countryside would be a great place to learn and play. Mary missed her friends already, but she knew she would make new ones soon. When Mary arrived at Wugong Elementary School, everything felt different. The school was much smaller than her old one, and the playground was surrounded by fields and trees. Mary took a deep breath and walked inside. Her new teacher, Mrs. Kim, welcomed her warmly. "Class, this is Mary. She's joining us from Seoul," Mrs. Kim said. All the students looked at Mary with curious eyes. Mary felt shy and smiled a little. One boy, Hans, waved at her and grinned. He had bright eyes and looked very friendly. "Hi, Mary, I'm Hans," he said. Hans showed Mary around the school. He introduced her to their classmates and explained where everything was. Mary felt grateful. Hans was kind and made her feel less scared. "Do you want to sit with me at lunch?" Hans asked. Mary nodded happily. "Yes, please." During lunch, Hans told Mary all about the village. He talked about the fun places to explore and the exciting games they played. Mary listened with wide eyes. She couldn't wait to see everything herself. After school, Hans offered to walk Mary home. They talked about their favorite books and games. Mary felt a warm feeling in her heart. She knew she had made a special friend. As they reached Mary's new house, Hans smiled and said, "Tomorrow, I'll show you my secret hideout." Mary's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I can't wait," she said. That night, Mary felt happy and content. She missed Seoul, but she also knew Wugong had its own adventures waiting for her. Chapter 2: The Secret Hideout. The next day, Mary woke up early, eager to see Hans and his secret hideout. After breakfast, she hurried to school, her heart pounding with excitement. Hans was waiting for her at the school gate. "Ready for an adventure?" he asked. Mary nodded enthusiastically. After school, Hans led Mary through the village. They walked along a narrow path that wound through tall grass and wildflowers. Mary looked around in wonder. Finally, they reached a small, hidden grove of trees. Hans parted the branches, revealing a cozy little hideout made of sticks and leaves. Inside, there were a few books, some blankets, and a small collection of treasures Hans had found. "This is my special place," Hans said proudly. "I come here when I want to think or read." Mary looked around in amazement. "It's wonderful, Hans. Thank you for showing me." They spent the afternoon playing and talking in the hideout. Hans told Mary stories about the village, and Mary shared tales of her life in Seoul. They laughed and had fun, feeling like they had known each other forever. When it started to get late, Hans walked Mary home again. Mary felt so happy. She knew she had found a true friend in Hans. "See you tomorrow, Mary," Hans said with a smile. "See you tomorrow, Hans," Mary replied. That night, Mary dreamed of their hideout and the adventures they would have. She felt lucky to have a friend like Hans. Chapter 3: Overcoming Fears. One day, while they were playing in the hideout, Mary noticed that Hans seemed a little worried. She asked him what was wrong. "There's something I'm scared of," Hans admitted. "There's an old bridge in the village that I've never crossed. People say it's very rickety and dangerous." Mary thought for a moment. "Why don't we face it together? We can be brave together, Hans." Hans looked at Mary and nodded. "Okay, let's do it." The next day, after school, they walked to the old bridge. It looked old and shaky, but Mary held Hans's hand tightly. "We can do this," Mary said confidently. Slowly, they started to cross the bridge. It creaked and wobbled under their feet, but they kept going. Hans felt scared, but with Mary by his side, he felt braver. Halfway across, the bridge swayed more. Hans almost wanted to turn back, but Mary squeezed his hand. "Just a little more, Hans. We're almost there," she encouraged. Finally, they reached the other side. Hans let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He turned to Mary with a huge smile. "We did it," Hans said, feeling proud. "Yes, we did," Mary said, smiling back. From that day on, Hans felt like he could do anything with Mary by his side. Their friendship grew stronger, and they knew they could face any challenge together. Chapter 4: A Special Surprise. One sunny morning, Hans came to school with a big smile on his face. He had a surprise for Mary. "Guess what?" Mary, there's a festival in the village tomorrow. Would you like to come with me? Hans asked excitedly. Mary's eyes lit up. I'd love to. What's the festival about? Hans explained that the festival was a celebration of the harvest. There would be games, food, and music. Mary couldn't wait to experience it. The next day, they met in the village square. The air was filled with the smell of delicious food and the sound of cheerful music. Colorful decorations were everywhere. Hans and Mary played games and won prizes. They tried different kinds of food and laughed a lot. Mary felt like she was part of something special. As the sun began to set, there was a beautiful fireworks display. Mary and Hans watched in awe as the sky lit up with bright colors. Thank you for bringing me here, Hans. This is amazing, Mary said. Hans smiled. I'm glad you're having fun, Mary. You're my best friend. Mary felt a warm glow in her heart. She knew this day would be a wonderful memory. Chapter 5, Helping Hands. One day, Mrs. Kim told the class that the village needed help with a big project. They were going to plant a community garden. Who wants to volunteer? Mrs. Kim asked. Hans and Mary raised their hands eagerly. They loved the idea of helping the village. Over the next few days, they worked hard in the garden. They planted seeds, watered the plants, and pulled weeds. It was hard work, but they enjoyed it. Mary and Hans worked together, encouraging each other when they got tired. They saw the garden grow little by little, and it made them feel proud. One afternoon, as they were finishing up, an elderly woman from the village approached them. She had a kind smile and thanked them for their hard work. You kids are doing a wonderful job. This garden will help many people, she said. Hans and Mary felt happy and proud. They knew they were making a difference in the village. That night, Mary told her parents about the garden. They were proud of her too. You and Hans are doing something very special, her mom said. Mary smiled, feeling grateful for the chance to help and for having a friend like Hans. Chapter 6, The Lost Puppy. One rainy afternoon, Hans and Mary were walking home from school when they heard a soft whimpering sound. They looked around and saw a tiny, shivering puppy hiding under a bush. Oh no, it's lost! Mary exclaimed. Hans knelt down and gently picked up the puppy. It looked scared and hungry. We need to help it, Hans said. They took the puppy to Mary's house and gave it some warm milk. The puppy drank eagerly and wagged its tail. We should try to find its owner, Mary suggested. Hans agreed. They made posters and put them up around the village. They also asked their neighbors if anyone knew the puppy. After a few days, a little boy came to Mary's house. He was overjoyed to see the puppy. "That's my puppy, Bobo. Thank you for finding him," the boy said happily. Hans and Mary felt happy knowing they had helped reunite the puppy with its owner. The boy thanked them again and left with a big smile. "You're such a kind friend, Hans," Mary said. "You are too, Mary." "We make a great team," Hans replied. They felt proud of their good deed and knew their friendship was something special. Chapter 7: A Big Storm. One evening, a big storm hit the village. The wind howled, and rain poured down in torrents. Mary felt scared as she listened to the storm from her room. The next morning, the village was a mess. Trees were knocked down, and some houses were damaged. Mary worried about Hans and hurried to find him. She found Hans helping his neighbors clean up the debris. He looked tired but determined. "Are you okay, Hans?" Mary asked, worried. "I'm fine, Mary." "We need to help everyone," Hans said. Mary joined him in helping the villagers. They picked up fallen branches and cleared paths. It was hard work, but they didn't give up. The villagers thanked Hans and Mary for their help. They felt grateful for their kindness and hard work. When they finally finished, Hans and Mary sat down to rest. They were exhausted but happy to have helped. "Thank you for being so brave, Hans," Mary said. "And thank you for being by my side, Mary," Hans replied. They knew that no matter what challenges came their way, they could face them together. Chapter 8: Saying Goodbye. As the days passed, Mary received news that she would be moving back to Seoul. Her heart sank at the thought of leaving Wugong and her best friend, Hans. She knew she would miss everything about the village, especially the adventures she shared with Hans. One afternoon, Mary and Hans sat in their secret hideout. Mary felt a lump in her throat as she tried to find the right words. "Hans, I have something to tell you," Mary began, her voice trembling. Hans looked at her with concern. "What is it, Mary?" Mary took a deep breath. I'm moving back to Seoul. My parents said it's time to go back. Hans's eyes widened, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he took Mary's hand. I'll miss you so much, Mary. Tears welled up in Mary's eyes. I'll miss you too, Hans. You're my best friend. They sat in silence for a while, holding hands and thinking about all the memories they had made together. Hans squeezed Mary's hand and smiled through his own tears. We'll always be friends, no matter where we are, Hans said firmly. Mary nodded. Yes, always. In the days leading up to her departure, Mary and Hans spent every moment they could together. They visited all their favorite spots in the village and talked about all the fun times they had shared. On Mary's last day in Wugong, the whole class threw her a farewell party. Mrs. Kim brought a cake, and everyone made cards for Mary. Hans gave her a special gift, a scrapbook filled with photos and drawings of their adventures. This is for you, so you'll never forget us, Hans said. Mary hugged him tightly. Thank you, Hans. I'll cherish it forever. When it was time to leave, Hans walked Mary to the bus stop. They hugged each other one last time, not wanting to let go. Goodbye, Hans, Mary whispered. Goodbye, Mary. Take care, Hans replied. As the bus drove away, Mary looked out the window, waving until Hans was out of sight. Her heart felt heavy, but she knew their friendship would last forever. Mary arrived in Seoul and settled back into her old life. She missed Wugong and Hans every day, but the scrapbook Hans gave her reminded her of their special bond. Mary and Hans wrote letters to each other regularly, sharing stories and updates. Each letter brought a smile to Mary's face and made her feel close to Hans, even from far away. Mary knew that no matter where life took them, their friendship would always be strong. And she looked forward to the day they would meet again. Chapter 9: A New Adventure. Months passed, and Mary continued to stay in touch with Hans through letters and phone calls. One day, Mary received a letter from Hans that made her heart race with excitement. Dear Mary, the letter began. I have some exciting news. My family and I are coming to Seoul for a visit. I can't wait to see you again and hear all about your new adventures. Mary couldn't believe it. She ran to her parents to share the news, and they were just as excited. They helped Mary plan a special day for Hans's visit. Finally, the day arrived. Mary waited at the train station, her heart pounding with anticipation. When the train pulled in, she saw Hans stepping off with his family. Mary ran to him, and they hugged tightly. "It's so good to see you, Hans," Mary exclaimed. "Me too, Mary. I've missed you," Hans replied, grinning. Mary showed Hans all around Seoul. They visited her old school, explored the parks, and ate delicious street food. Hans was amazed by the big city, and Mary loved sharing her world with him. They talked about their old adventures in Wugong and dreamed about new ones they could have in the future. Mary realized that their friendship was just as strong as ever, even though they lived far apart. As the day came to an end, Hans and Mary sat by the Han River, watching the sunset. "I'm so glad we're friends, Mary," Hans said. "Me too, Hans. No matter where we are, we'll always have our memories and our friendship," Mary replied. Hans nodded. "And we'll always have more adventures to look forward to." Mary smiled, feeling grateful for the special bond they shared. She knew that with a friend like Hans, every day was a new adventure waiting to happen. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Mary and Hans made a promise to always stay in touch and visit each other whenever they could. Their friendship had weathered many challenges, and they knew it would only grow stronger with time. And so, Mary and Hans's story continued, filled with laughter, love, and endless adventures.
구독과 좋아요 부탁드립니다. 감사합니다.